May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Excuse me, but I need to explain why I have my ear bandaged. Freckled face boys like me, growing up in the South, oftentimes when they get older, have to have skin cancers removed. And the last time I had this kind of surgery, my then colleague, Tim Safford, said, "O sacred ear now wounded." So now that we've gotten that out of the way, one other personal remark before we launch into our Independence Day sermon. I just want to note that today is my last sermon for this program year. Each July, I take a month for reading and planning sermons for next year, and then in August, take a month of rest with my family. So for the remainder of this month, I will be working on a chart of sermon themes and musings for next year's sermons, and then I hand that over to James Walker in August, and then my wife and I go back to Ireland for some restorative vacation time. Then on Homecoming Sunday, I'll be back with you feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for another amazing year in this faith community. We have great plans for each week this summer for preaching and education, and we have plans already for next year for stimulating thinkers and pioneering writers as we seek here at All Saints to be a healing community with a theology for the 21st century, a place where we work and pray to make God's radically inclusive love tangible and turn the human race into the human family. Or in the words of the For Freedom speech, to make sure that freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Of all of my years in the priesthood, this past year has by far been my favorite. I just want to recount some, I feel compelled to recount some of the hallmarks of it. Both my staff and my staff colleagues and the vestry and I reflected this past week on this past program year, 2013-2014, with deep gratitude. We have taken another step in forging what 21st century Christianity looks like, that is non-bigoted and friendly to both science and the arts. We've received the gifts of 4 new priests on staff and a new director of giving, as well as the continued fruitful ministry of all of our staff members who are called to ministry without ordination. I just want to remind you that we who are ordained need to be constantly reminded that God could not trust us to be lay people. We launched new ventures in congregational development and education and formation. We took important steps in leadership development, becoming even more a community that recognizes and celebrates racial and ethnic and cultural differences. We've made an important stride this past year in organizing ourselves into congregational dinners. We focused on gun violence prevention and on economic justice, nonviolence, trying to equip and call all members to the prophethood of all believers. Richard Rohr tapped All Saints to be the first faith community in the world to participate in his new school's Conspire program. Our own music ministries and children, youth, and families ministries continue to inspire us all. And this coming year, we will have yet another children's choir offered for even pre-kindergarten members. We had this amazing breakthrough in terms of our streaming this service. Welcome all of you who are joining us from the comforts of your own home or other vacation places. Developing social media due to the amazing generosity of a deceased member We've been able to attend to the fabric of our buildings, including our stained glass restoration project. And all of this and more has taken place in the midst of a significant number of deaths in our parish family, with a pastoral care ministry that has been taxed and yet has grown to now include a new effort in an expanded healing ministry. All of that I just wanted to review, and I'm grateful, grateful, grateful. Now, every year on this Sunday, we reflect on what it means to live as followers of Christ in the United States of America. We do this with gusto and humility on this Sunday closest to the 4th of July. We sing with inspiration the great patriotic hymns of our country. I always get lumps in my throat while singing, and at the same time realizing that America is an inspiring idea and not yet a full reality. For my way of thinking, a central symbol for today's celebration will be the presentation of an American flag, unfurled, folded, placed on the altar by someone who has served in the armed forces, placed there as an offering, the way we will place our money, just as our money symbolizes our financial world. We place on the altar this folded flag, symbolizing our patriotic and national world. Everything we place there, we place for God's transformation. Now, each year prior to July the 4th, I try to read a new book about a chapter in our nation's history. And this year I read Harvey J. Kaye's book, The Fight for the Four Freedoms. It tells the story of why the greatest generation, my parents' generation, fought, and how Franklin Delano Roosevelt developed the notion of the four freedoms. The speech of his we just read from 1941. The four freedoms became popularized in many ways, including in the iconic paintings by Norman Rockwell. The four freedoms, as Franklin Roosevelt articulated them, were freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, meaning economic want, and freedom from fear. That period in American history was one of the most progressive chapters in our nation's history, if not the most progressive, that many would argue we have regressed from. In 1936, long before any of y'all were ever born, after FDR won his second presidential election over Alf Landon, it was said of the U.S. during that time that a new story of America was definitely in the air about labor and class, ethnicity, race, and gender. There was, however, a sense that, in the words of Harold Stearns, we have not yet fully explored the democratic way of life. Democracy is not something that has been tried and found wanting. It has not yet been tried. Democracy is never done. Democracy is something a nation must always be doing. So for us who love God and feel called to God's purposes, there is in this morning's call in the Hebrew Scriptures an opportunity to pattern our life after God who has no favorites and who cannot be bribed. An immigration promoting God, a God who brings justice to the orphan and the widowed, to the most vulnerable, and who befriends the foreigner among you with food and clothing. And in this gospel lesson, you and I are called by Jesus to be instruments of peace in the world and in history, not by making war against our enemies, but by praying for and loving our enemy and those who persecute us. My own heart has been broken this week by two areas where we have fallen short of our democratic ideals. The first has to do with immigration. Have you read and seen those thousands of unaccompanied minors escaping oppression, violence, and even death in their Central American countries? Officials have been stunned by a surge of unaccompanied children crossing into the United States. It is said that 70,000 kids will show up alone without adult companions at our border this year. And many are saying that it is problematic to be looking at this issue from the lens of immigration. This is not an immigration problem, but a refugee problem. And then some townspeople from Murrieta, California, have turned back buses saying we're not going to have any illegal immigrants in our community. In a speech to the daughters of the American Revolution, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said to those ladies, "All of us are descended from immigrants, refugees, and revolutionists." We need to keep that fact in mind as we fight for the universality of human rights. Thank God President Obama said that he's going to do something since Congress won't. We need to encourage him to make sure that this country continues to be a country of immigrants. The other area where democracy, from my perspective, fell short this week has to do with women. On Monday, the Supreme Court decided 5-4 that the government cannot require certain employers to provide insurance coverage for methods of birth control and emergency contraception that conflict with their religious beliefs. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg penned a blistering dissent, saying that her 5 male colleagues who voted in the majority made a decision of startling breadth, which would allow corporations, not religious organizations, but corporations, public corporations, to opt out of almost any law that they find incompatible with their sincerely held religious beliefs. Here a woman penned a dissent that talked about the impact of this decision. Justice Ginsburg wrote, "It bears note in this regard that the cost of an IUD, an intrauterine device, is nearly equivalent to a month's full-time pay for workers earning the minimum wage." Is the Supreme Court now going to set itself up as making decisions case by case for any religious-oriented corporation, profit corporation, saying that because their owners have certain religious beliefs, that all of their employees have to be aligned with those religious beliefs? It is a way of outflanking the First Amendment, the Establishment of Religion clause. The court has ventured into a minefield, Justice Ginsburg wrote. One of the problems that I have with it, that it is seemingly so sexist. Men won't lose any of their access to health care coverage under this ruling. In fact, Hobby Lobby, the corporation, their insurance covers vasectomies. But yet they won't let women have any kind of contraception. This is blatant discrimination and falls short of democracy. You and I are called to fight for democracy. That is what it means to be a United States citizen. But I do want to distinguish between fighting and making war. Many of you know that for 8 years, I went to see a psychiatrist. My wife and all of you are very grateful for that. Otherwise, I'd be even crazier than I am now. But my psychiatrist was very clear to teach me the difference between fighting and making war. He said, you can't have a real relationship with someone else. You can't have a real marriage. And I'm translating it to say you really can't have a real country if you don't fight and make sure that you're heard and that your values are respected. But that's very different from making war. In making war, you tear the other person down. You criticize that person's personhood. In debate laws, it's an ad hominem argument. You can't tear someone else down. And we in America must have a fight about what is real democracy without tearing one another down and without having war. We have 4 freedoms Roosevelt said we must fight for: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from economic want, and the freedom from fear. Please note that Roosevelt, when he made this speech to Congress, at the end of every freedom, he emphasized for everyone. That is the godly posture. Freedom of speech for everyone, not just a chosen few, not just the Christians. Freedom of worship for everyone, not just a chosen few, not just the Christians. Freedom from economic want for everyone, not just the privileged. And freedom from fear for everyone, not just the well-armed. That is our fight as U.S. citizens that we recommit ourselves to as members of All Saints Church every year. Now, finally, my colleagues are tired of me talking about how thrilled I've been to go to brain science classes this year. But I am. I had a wonderful time. And what I learned is that there are 3 exercises that you and I are invited into in order to be fully alive or to have well-being. My neuroscience psychiatrist teacher has said it's very important, if you want to be well, if you want to have well-being, to exercise your bodily muscles. Our body is a temple, and we need physical exertion on a regular basis. Number 2, it is important for us to exercise our newness muscles. We are called as a creature of God to be constantly renewed. The newness muscles are the muscles of forgiveness, of compassion, of care, of giving ourselves and giving others a brand new start, of healing, and of thinking in new ways. Albert Einstein says, we will never get to any of the world's problems and solve them by thinking in the same way that the problems were made. We have to bring new ways of thinking to solve old problems. The third muscles that have to be exercised, according to my neuroscientist teacher, are contemplative muscles. Our brains are hungry for centeredness, for mindfulness, for meditation, for contemplation. The writer of the lyrics to Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee identified it in terms of ocean depths of happy rest. When we go down into the depths of our oceans and discover their serenity, even though the surface of our oceans are choppy as they can be, we get renewed and our brains actually become more pliable, what is called neuroplasticity. Those three exercises of our muscles are really important, but I think on July the 4th Sunday, we need to add this fourth muscle. We need to exercise our democracy muscles, fighting for democracy for everyone, fighting for a life of healthy public policy where everyone is served, everyone's religion, everyone's speech and expression are preserved, cared for. Everybody is protected from economic want, and everybody is protected from fear. My friends, if we exercise our bodies, our innovation, our contemplation, and our democratization, then you and I can participate in God's agenda of making the whole creation new. Amen.